They thought we were helpless. A primitive speck of blue dust floating in the void. So the Jacquard Armada dropped out of warp, weapons hot, expecting a slaughter. They didn't know we had been waiting in the dark, armed to the teeth. The galaxy is about to learn why. The command deck of the Jacquard flagship, Pride of the Ascendant, was a masterpiece of sleek, biometallic engineering. Bathed in the soft bioluminescent glow of the tactical hololithic displays, Fleet Commander Kaylor stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring into the infinite black. His armada, comprising 80 dreadnoughts and over 300 strike cruisers, was the terror of the Orion Spur. They conquered worlds not with diplomacy, but with the overwhelming, righteous fire of a superior species. "Commander," spoke Sub-Officer Vale, his mandibles clicking in the rhythmic cadence of standard military dialect. "We have dropped out of translation space. We are currently positioned at the outer edge of the target system's heliopause. System designation 804. A. Local identifier. Sol." Kaylor sneered, a subtle shifting of his facial scales. "Status of the primary target?" "The third planet," Vial reported, tapping his consoles. "Scanners confirm our previous long-range telemetry. It is a Class 2 industrial world. Heavy atmospheric pollution, chaotic radio frequency emissions, and a highly fragmented global communication network. They are currently utilizing primitive carbon combustion engines and rudimentary orbital satellites. We are detecting zero trace of dark matter reactors, no localized warp signatures, and absolutely no planetary shielding." Kaylor's chest swelled with a triumphant breath. It was almost too easy. The Galactic Council's expansion mandates had grown overly restrictive, bogged down by bureaucratic debates regarding the preservation of developing species. But Kaylor was a soldier of the old blood. The Jacquard economy required raw materials, and this unaligned, unprotected blue orb was practically begging to be strip-mined. By the time the Council's peacekeepers found out, the planet would already be a compliant vassal state under Kaylor's heel. "Set course for the third planet," Kaylor ordered. "Full sub-light speed. I want to be in their upper atmosphere before their primitive radar even processes our shadows." The Armada surged forward, passing a barren, rusted world and a colossal gas giant. The system was entirely quiet, practically dead, save for the localized chatter echoing from the blue planet. Kaylor watched the magnification of the world grow on the main screen. He could see the sprawling lights of their divided cities, the massive undefended oceans. Entering the planetary exosphere, Vael announced, "Commander, I am detecting a high concentration of orbital debris. It appears they have cluttered their own orbit with defunct satellites and metallic waste." "Ignore it," Kaylor scoffed. "Our deflector shields will vaporize their garbage. Prepare the plasma bombardment batteries. Target their major population centers. Let us give them a swift, blinding demonstration of our superiority." But as the Pride of the Ascendant crossed the threshold of the planet's geostationary orbit, the debris stopped acting like debris. A sudden, piercing alarm shattered the calm of the command deck. The bioluminescent lights flickered from a serene blue to an angry, pulsing red. "Report!" Kaylor barked, gripping the edge of the holodable. "Sir! The orbital debris, it is shifting! Repositioning!" Vale's voice cracked, a sound of genuine panic bleeding through his military discipline. "They are not defunct satellites. I am reading massive power spikes. Nuclear reactors are coming online, hundreds of them, no, thousands." Before Kaylor could process the impossibility of the statement, the dark void around Earth erupted into blinding light. Humanity hadn't built a unified, utopian space fleet. They had done something much more terrifying. Through the clandestine efforts of DARPA, heavily subsidized by black-budget trillions funneled into Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works and Boeing's Phantom Works, the humans had turned their entire orbit into a networked, automated kill zone. It was the realization of Ronald Reagan's Cold War Star Wars program, quietly perfected over decades of deep state paranoia. Vampire, vampire, vampire. A synthesized, chillingly calm human voice broadcasted across all open Jacquard frequencies, bleeding through the alien translation matrices. The first wave hit. Not plasma, not lasers, but cold, hard, unforgiving physics. Project Thor, colloquially known as Rods from God, unleashed its payload. Telephone pole-sized rods of dense tungsten dropped from high orbit and accelerated by gravitational slingshots and chemical thrusters, slammed into the Jacquard dreadnoughts at Mach 300. Energy shields, designed to dissipate the thermal shock of plasma weapons or deflect light-based lasers, were utterly useless against raw kinetic mass, moving at a fraction of the speed of light. Kaler watched in absolute horror as the cruiser, Vanguard of the Sun, a ship that had subjugated 3 star systems, was simply erased. A tungsten rod punched straight through its hyper-alloy hull, traveling from the dorsal command deck out through the engineering bay in a microsecond. The ship's dark matter core detonated, taking 2 adjacent frigates with it in a silent, blossoming sphere of blue fire. "Evasive maneuvers!" Kaler screamed. "Return fire! Fire at will!" "We can't lock on!" Vale shouted over the deafening groan of the flagship's hull, compensating for the shockwaves. "The planetary defense grid is completely automated and running on decentralized AI. Sir, I am detecting massive thermal blooms from the lunar surface." The moon. The dead, gray, cratered moon. Hidden beneath the regolith, a joint venture between the United States Space Force and Raytheon Technologies, had installed an array of nuclear-pumped X-ray lasers, Project Excalibur, scaled up to planetary defense proportions. As the Jacquard fleet broke formation to dodge the kinetic bombardment, the moon lit up. Invisible beams of hyper-focused X-ray radiation powered by the detonation of thermonuclear warheads sliced through the vacuum of space. 3 Jacquard dreadnoughts were cut in half instantaneously, their hulls superheated to the point of flash vaporization. "Shields are failing, engine output dropping." "Commander," a communications officer cried out, "we are receiving a localized transmission from the surface. It is bypassing our encryption entirely." A face appeared on the main holoscreen. It was a human. An older male, wearing a crisp, dark blue uniform adorned with ribbons and stars. His expression was not one of fear, nor of triumphant arrogance. It was a look of cold, bureaucratic annoyance. "General David Bradley of the United States Space Command." "Unidentified vessels," Bradley's voice echoed on the bridge. "You have entered restricted airspace without clearance. You have failed to broadcast a recognized IFF code. You are currently being engaged by the Automated Aegis Orbital Defense Network. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded, or you will be entirely neutralized. You have 60 seconds to comply." Kaler stared at the screen, his mind fracturing. This was supposed to be a type. Zero civilization. They were still burning fossil fuels. How did they possess automated X-ray arrays and kinetic kill vehicles? "Never," Kaler snarled at the human. "We are the Jacquard. We do not surrender to dirt-scratching primitives." General Bradley sighed, a sound that conveyed a terrifying level of mundane exhaustion. "Copy that. Aegis control. Weapons free. Scrub the sky. The transmission cut." "Sir, incoming!" A swarm of over 10,000 smart missiles, launched from submerged nuclear submarines in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, broke the atmosphere. They weren't aiming for the alien ships. They were aiming for the space around them. As they detonated, they unleashed a cascading, localized electromagnetic pulse network, a grid of EMPs designed to fry the optical sensors and navigation arrays of the alien vessels. Blinded, bleeding, and decimated, Kaler fell to his knees as sparks rained down from the ceiling of his bridge. In less than 12 minutes, his invincible armada of 380 ships had been reduced to a graveyard of twisted metal and floating corpses. "Initiate emergency translation warp," Kaler gasped, clutching his bruised thorax. "Get us out! Get us out now!" As the crippled pride of the Ascendant violently tore a hole in space-time to flee, leaving the burning wreckage of its fleet behind in the cold orbit of Earth, Kaler realized a horrifying truth. He hadn't ambushed a primitive world. He had walked into a planetary bear trap. The grand citadel of the Galactic Council was a marvel of architectural harmony, suspended in the center of the artificial ring world of Ethelgard. It was a place of sweeping crystalline arches, soft bioluminescent flora, and an atmosphere of profound, enlightened peace. Representatives from over 200 advanced species sat in the tiered, circular amphitheater, their voices a low, civilized hum of galactic politics. Today, however, the air in the chamber was thick with an unprecedented tension. In the center of the polished obsidian floor, suspended in a stasis cuff projector, stood Fleet Commander Kalor. His uniform was torn, his scales dull from radiation burns, and his pride entirely broken. The silence in the room was absolute as High Arbiter Othran, a towering being of graceful, elongating limbs and 4 deeply perceptive eyes, leaned forward from his podium. Othran's voice, amplified by the acoustic perfection of the chamber, was laced with a chilling disbelief. Let the council records reflect that I am asking this for a 3rd time, simply to ensure that my translation matrix has not critically malfunctioned, Othran said slowly. Commander Kalor, you admit that you diverted the 7th Vanguard Fleet from its assigned patrol route, bypassed the quarantine beacons of Sector 4G, and initiated an unprovoked orbital strike on the 3rd planet of System 804A. Kalor ground his teeth. Yes, High Arbiter, but I assert my right of conquest. It was an unaligned world. They are not members of this council, and by all standard metrics, they are a type. 0 civilization. They utilize combustion, Arbiter. Combustion? They should have been swept aside in moments. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of delegates. Several representatives physically recoiled, their skin paling or scales rattling in sudden visceral horror. You attacked Earth? Othran whispered. The sheer gravity of the word Earth seemed to drop the temperature in the room. Yes, Earth, Terra, whatever they call their mudball, Kalor shouted, desperate to regain his dignity. And I demand council retribution. They utilized banned, highly destructive kinetic weaponry. They destroyed 379 of my vessels in under 12 standard minutes. My fleet was annihilated by automated orbital defense grids that defy all logical technological progression. They must be sanctioned and destroyed. Othran slowly lowered his face into his 4 hands, letting out a breath that sounded like a dying wind. When he looked back up, his eyes held nothing but profound, terrifying pity. You fool, Othran murmured. You absolute, arrogant fool. The High Arbiter pressed a glyph on his console. The center of the room illuminated, replacing Kalor with a massive holographic projection of the Sol system. The blue planet, Earth, hovered in the center, surrounded by a faint, pulsing red sphere of energy. Commander Kalor, Othran began, his voice echoing with the weight of ancient history. You, like many of the younger military caste, clearly do not study the restricted archives. You believed Sector 4G was marked as an unclaimed primitive zone. It is not. It is a Class Omega quarantine zone, the highest restriction order in the history of this council. Kalor blinked, confusion warring with his anger. Quarantine? For a pre-FTL species? Why? Are they diseased? They are not pre-FTL because they lack the intelligence to crack the physics of hyperspace, Othran stated grimly. They are pre-FTL because we deliberately crippled the fabric of space-time around their solar system to prevent them from leaving it. The chamber was dead silent. Even the senior delegates who knew the truth shifted uncomfortably in their anti-gravity seats. Observe, Othran commanded. The hologram shifted to historical footage, captured by cloaked council observation probes decades ago. Black and white imagery flickered to life. Approximately one of their centuries ago, this species entered a global, industrialized conflict, what they refer to as their Second World War. We watched, fascinated and horrified at their capacity for mechanized slaughter. But it was what they did at the end of that conflict that forced our hand. The projection showed a barren desert, a steel tower, and then a blinding, terrifying flash of nuclear fire rising into a mushroom cloud. The Trinity test. They split the atom, Othran said softly, not to generate clean energy, not to power medical technology. They split the fundamental building blocks of the universe, solely to build a bigger bomb to drop on their own people. The hologram shifted to footage of the Cold War. Tens of thousands of nuclear warheads sitting in silos aimed at each other. They held their entire biosphere hostage in a standoff of mutually assured destruction, Othran continued. They weaponized their planet's crust. They weaponized their orbit. Our sociologists ran predictive models. If a species that aggressively paranoid, that instinctively violent, was allowed to discover faster-than-light travel, they would not join the galactic community. They would conquer it, or burn it to ash out of sheer preemptive paranoia. Othran leaned forward, his gaze piercing Kalor. So, the Council acted. We established a quantum-dampening field around their heliopause, rendering traditional warp mechanics impossible within their system. We trapped them in their own cage, hoping they would eventually destroy themselves and spare the galaxy the burden of doing it. Kalor's mind raced. But they didn't destroy themselves. And if they couldn't invent warp drive, how did they build those defenses? Because a new, trembling voice spoke. It was the Chief of Intelligence, a slender, avian alien named Verx. Because in the year 1947 of their calendar, one of our observation drones malfunctioned. It crashed in a desert region they call Roswell, New Mexico. Kalor's blood ran cold. They recovered the wreckage. Verx continued, tapping a console to show schematics of primitive human military bases expanding underground. They didn't understand the FTL drive because our dampening field made the physics inert. But they reverse-engineered the armor. They reverse-engineered the sensor arrays. And most importantly, they learned they were not alone. Othran stood up, his robes flowing around him. Humanity looked up at the stars and realized there was an advanced alien presence watching them. And because they view the universe through the lens of their own violent history, they assumed we were a threat. For the last 80 years, behind the veil of civilian ignorance, their governments and private defense contractors, entities they call DARPA, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin have been silently preparing for an interstellar war. They didn't build FTL ships, Verx added, her feathers ruffled in fear. They built a fortress. They turned their entire solar system into a heavily fortified bunker, armed with crude, brute force physics that our energy shields were never designed to counter. Kalor stared at the hologram of Earth. The debris he had so casually dismissed was a paranoid species' ultimate shield. And now, Othran whispered, the terror finally breaking through his stoic facade. You have proved their paranoia completely justified. You attacked them. You gave them the one thing they have been waiting nearly a century for, an overt act of war. Before Kalor could formulate a response, the Grand Citadel shuddered. A deep, resonant, and physically painful low-frequency alarm blared through the massive chamber. The lights flickered. The holographic projection of the Sol system violently warped and shattered into static. "High Arbiter," a frantic technician screamed from the lower pits. "Sir, the dampening field around Sector 4G. It's gone." Othran gripped his podium. Did it fail? "No, sir." The technician's hands flew frantically across his controls. "It was dismantled, forcibly." Someone generated an inverse tachyon pulse from the surface of Earth and shattered the quarantine grid from the inside. Panic erupted in the council chamber. Delegates shrieked, scrambling for the exits. And, sir, the technician's voice was nothing more than a terrified whimper. A spatial rupture is opening, right outside the Citadel. They aren't using standard translation warp. They are. They are physically tearing a hole in real space. The space outside the pristine, glowing ring world of Ethelgard twisted into a sickening, violent vortex of purple and black energy. Unlike the smooth, silent transition of the Jacquard warp drives, this rupture screamed. It was a localized Einstein-Rosen bridge, ripped open by brute force nuclear fusion and dark matter acceleration, a technology the Council deemed too unstable and dangerous to ever utilize. From the heart of the swirling abyss emerged a vessel. It was not sleek. It possessed no graceful curves, no bioluminescent aesthetics, no artful design meant to convey harmony with the cosmos. It was an ugly, brutalist slab of matte black radar-absorbent titanium tungsten alloy. It looked less like a spaceship and more like an anvil cast in the fires of hell. Along its massive flanks, thick white letters read, USS Oppenheimer. Surrounding the central vessel were 6 smaller, wedge-shaped destroyers, their railgun batteries visibly tracking the Citadel's defense platforms. Inside the council chamber, the massive viewport darkened to compensate for the radiation bleeding off the human ships. High Arbiter Othran watched in paralyzed silence. The entire Galactic Council, a coalition of billions of beings, held its collective breath. High Arbiter, the communications officer stammered. They are requesting permission to dock. Requesting? Othran asked, his voice hollow. It is phrased as a request, sir, but their targeting lasers are currently painted on our central plasma reactor. Othran closed his eyes. Grant them access. Stand down all Citadel security. If we fire a single shot, I fear they will crack this ring world in half. 10 minutes later, the massive blast doors to the central council floor hissed open. The alien guards, armed with elegant plasma pikes, instinctively stepped back. Through the doorway walked a delegation of 4 humans. They did not wear flowing diplomatic robes. They wore crisp, charcoal gray military dress uniforms. Leading them was Ambassador Albert Pendleton, a man with silver hair, sharp, predatory eyes, and the posture of a man who had negotiated treaties in the most hostile environments on his homeworld. Beside him walked General Clayton Reed, his chest adorned with a heavy array of colorful ribbons and medals, his jaw set like carved granite. Flanking them were 2 heavily armored operatives wearing bulky, exoskeletal suits bearing the insignia of the newly formed United Nations Orbital Marine Corps. Their heavy boots clacked rhythmically against the crystalline floor. To the aliens in the room, the humans looked terrifyingly dense, their high-gravity homeworld evident in their thick musculature and heavy bone structure. Pendleton stopped in the exact center of the room, looking up at the towering High Arbiter Othran. He did not bow. He did not offer a gesture of galactic peace. He simply adjusted his cuffs and spoke in flawless, synthesized galactic standard, a language they must have ripped from the databanks of Kalor's destroyed fleet just hours ago. My name is Albert Pendleton, acting representative of the Unified Earth Directorate, he said, his voice calm, measured, and echoing with unyielding authority. We are here to return your property. General Reed stepped forward. From a metallic case at his side, he withdrew a ruined, blackened piece of armor plating. It bore the insignia of the Jacquard Vanguard fleet. He dropped it onto the pristine floor. The heavy metal hit the crystalline surface with a deafening clang that made half the council flinch. 17 hours ago, Pendleton continued, pacing slowly, his eyes sweeping over the terrified alien delegates. A fleet of 380 warships entered the Sol system. They ignored our automated warnings. They attempted to fire upon civilian population centers. As per our planetary defense protocols, they were neutralized. Pendleton stopped and looked directly at the stasis field holding Commander Kalor. The human's eyes narrowed, a flash of pure, primal apex predator instinct bleeding through his diplomatic veneer. We captured the commanding officer's escape pod telemetry, Pendleton said. We also salvaged the dark matter FTL core from a relatively intact dreadnought. Your technology was surprisingly intuitive. It took the engineers at the Lockheed Skunk Works and MIT approximately 6 hours to bypass the safety governors, adapt it to our existing thermonuclear reactors, and track the trajectory back to this location. Othran gripped his podium. Ambassador Pendleton, you must understand. The attack was unsanctioned. The Jacquard commander acted rogue. The Galactic Council desires no war with Earth. That is fortunate for you, High Arbiter, General Reed interjected, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Because if you wanted a war, you wouldn't be sitting here breathing right now." A murmur of outrage rippled through the chamber, but it was quickly silenced by a sharp glare from Reed. "Let's stop playing games," Pendleton said, dropping the diplomatic tone. "We know about the quarantine field. We analyzed the quantum dampening frequency. You locked us in our own backyard because you were terrified of what we might do if we got out." Othrin swallowed hard. "Your species' history is extraordinarily violent, Ambassador. You must view it from our perspective. You detonated atomic weapons on your own biosphere. We acted out of preservation for the greater galaxy. And you were right to be cautious," Pendleton admitted smoothly, shockingly agreeable. "We are violent. We are paranoid, territorial, and fiercely competitive. We spent the last 5,000 years fighting each other for resources, for land, for ideology. But 70 years ago, when your little observation drone crashed in the New Mexico desert, you gave us something we never had before." Pendleton leaned forward, placing both hands on the edge of the central diplomatic railing. "You gave us a common enemy. The realization that there was an advanced, potentially hostile universe out there forced us to grow up. The Cold War, the arms races, that wasn't just us fighting each other anymore. That was us testing our limits, pushing our science to the absolute bleeding edge, building a military-industrial complex capable of defending our home from you." General Reed pulled up a holographic projector from his wrist. Suddenly, the air in the chamber filled with schematics. Not just of the Aegis Orbital Defense Network, but of massive shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt, mining colonies on Mars churning out tungsten kinetic kill vehicles, and deep space listening posts disguised as comets. "While you grew complacent in your peaceful federation," Reed said, "we spent a century turning our solar system into a fortress. We didn't break out of your quarantine field because we couldn't. We stayed inside because we were busy arming the perimeter. We were waiting for the day you decided to come finish the job." Pendleton stepped back, straightening his suit. "Commander Kaler just knocked on our door. He found out we were home. Now, we are standing in your living room." The humans didn't bring a plea for peace, nor did they bring a declaration of conquest. They brought a terrifying, undeniable reality. Earth was no longer a developing world to be observed or quarantined. It was an apex predator that had just slipped its leash. "The quarantine is over," Pendleton declared into the deafening silence. "The Sol system is now recognized as sovereign human territory. Any foreign vessel entering our heliopause without prior diplomatic clearance from the United Nations will be considered hostile and destroyed on sight." He looked up at Othrin. "We are willing to open diplomatic channels. We are willing to trade. But know this, High Arbiter. We know how to build your FTL drives now. We know where your capital is. And we have 80 years of weapons development just waiting to be test-fired." Pendleton turned on his heel. "We will await your formal ambassadors at the edge of our system. Do not send warships." With that, the human delegation turned and walked out of the chamber, their heavy boots echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock. As the massive blast doors sealed shut behind them, High Arbiter Othrin collapsed back into his seat, the terrifying realization washing over him and the rest of the council. They hadn't successfully quarantined a disease. They had inadvertently built a crucible, and humanity had just forged itself into the sharpest blade in the galaxy. The departure of the human delegation left the Grand Citadel of Ethelgard in a state of paralyzing shock. High Arbiter Othrin remained slumped in his command chair, the heavy silence of the chamber broken only by the frantic, whispered translations of 100 terrified alien diplomats. The stasis cuff holding Commander Kaler hummed quietly, a physical reminder of the catastrophic miscalculation that had just shattered the galactic status quo. "High Arbiter," Chief of Intelligence Verx chirped, her avian features trembling. "The human vessels have initiated their jury-rigged warp sequence. They are gone. But, sir, the telemetry data they left behind on our servers. It is a live feed." Othrin slowly opened his 4 eyes. "A live feed of what?" "Of Sol. Of Earth." Verx swallowed hard. "They want us to watch." The central holographic projector roared back to life, but this time it was not displaying classified council reconnaissance. It was an open, unencrypted broadcast originating from Earth's surface, translated into galactic standard in real time. On Earth, the veil of secrecy had finally been torn down. For 80 years, the global populace had been kept in the dark, believing their space programs were underfunded, crawling endeavors. The sudden, localized EMP spikes from the orbital defense grid engaging the Jacquard fleet had knocked out commercial internet across the northern hemisphere for 12 minutes. The world had panicked, fearing a nuclear exchange. Now, standing behind a podium bearing the seal of the newly revealed United Earth Directorate, United States President David Miller was addressing the globe, and by extension, the listening galaxy. "My fellow citizens of Earth," Miller began, his voice resolute, carrying the weight of a truth kept hidden for generations. "Yesterday, our world was attacked by an extraterrestrial armada. I am speaking to you now to assure you that the threat was neutralized before a single enemy vessel could breach our upper atmosphere. We are safe." The holographic feed split, showing global news networks broadcasting to billions of stunned humans. "Since 1947, humanity has known we were not alone," Miller continued. "To protect our world from the vast unknowns of the cosmos, a shadow coalition of our greatest minds and industries was formed. What you know as civilian space exploration, the rockets of SpaceX, the lunar landers of Blue Origin, the deep space probes of NASA and the ESA, were merely the logistical supply chains for a much larger, classified endeavor. The screens shifted, showcasing footage that made the Galactic Council delegates gasp. Hidden launch bays beneath the ice of Antarctica ground open, revealing massive, wedge-shaped orbital destroyers. On the red sands of Mars, holographic cloaking fields dropped, exposing sprawling, heavily fortified underground shipyards built by Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems. Thousands of human workers and engineers in exosuits were seen finalizing the armor plating on dreadnoughts that dwarfed Kalor's destroyed flagship. "We did not seek this war," Miller stated firmly, staring directly into the camera lens, fully aware the Galactic Council was watching, "but we have spent nearly a century preparing to finish it. As of this moment, the United Earth Defense Fleet is officially active. We will defend our borders, we will secure our future, and we will never, ever be caged again." In the council chamber, Othran buried his face in his hands. The humans had essentially turned their entire civilization into a sleeper cell military complex, and Kalor had just woken them up. But the Jacquard Empire was not known for its humility. Deep in the heart of Jacquard space, the Emperor had watched Kalor's humiliation and the human broadcast with boiling, unadulterated rage. For a primitive species to destroy a vanguard fleet was an embarrassment. For them to publicly claim orbital supremacy was an insult that demanded annihilation. "They rely on brute force and archaic physical projectiles," the Emperor hissed to his tactical advisors. "They cannot detect what they cannot see. Deploy the Shadow Fleet. Bypass their crude orbital cannons. Sneak into their system and drop biological nerve toxins on their major population centers. Let us see how their automated lasers handle ghosts." The Jacquard Shadow Fleet consisted of 50 stealth cruisers, coated in a light-bending biopolymer that rendered them entirely invisible to standard optical and thermal scanners, and utterly silent to radar. They were the Emperor's most terrifying assassins, a fleet that had ended civil wars before they even began. Within hours, the stealth ships slipped into translation warp, charting a course directly for the Sol system. Their orders were simple: bypass the planetary defense grid, sterilize the Earth's atmosphere, and leave the human military infrastructure intact for Jacquard occupation. It was a brilliant plan, relying on the assumption that human sensor technology was as primitive as their combustion engines. It was a fatal assumption. The outer edge of the Sol system, near the orbit of Neptune, was a dark, frozen wasteland. To the naked eye, and even to standard galactic sensors, it was entirely empty. When the Jacquard Shadow Fleet dropped out of warp, maintaining strict radio silence and maximum cloaking, they believed they were perfectly hidden. They began a slow, sublight creep toward Earth. their weapon bays priming the biological payloads. Aboard the command bridge of the UES Retribution, hidden in the shadow of Neptune's moon Triton, Admiral Thomas Wright took a sip of his black coffee. The command deck was bathed in the dim amber glow of tactical screens. "Admiral," a sensor operator called out, his eyes locked on a readout provided by a joint Northrop Grumman IBM quantum computing array. "We have gravitational microdistortions at grid sector 09er. They're trying to sneak in. 50 contacts. No thermal, no radar, but they are displacing dark matter exactly where our quantum tripwires are set." Wright smiled, a cold, predatory grimace. The aliens thought invisibility was a new concept. Humanity had been experimenting with stealth aircraft since the 1970s. They knew exactly how to hunt things that didn't want to be seen. "They really think we just put up a fence and went to sleep," Wright murmured. "Targeting control. Upload the firing solutions to the Jupiter-class railgun platforms. Do not paint them with lasers. Do not give them a lock-on warning. Fire blind into the gravitational anomalies. Let's teach them about the conservation of momentum." Millions of miles away, hidden among the asteroid belt, automated railgun platforms the size of skyscrapers pivoted silently in the vacuum of space. Electromagnetic coils charged, drawing power from localized fusion reactors. There was no flash of fire. There was only the violent, instantaneous release of kinetic energy. Traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light, 50 depleted uranium slugs crossed the solar system in a matter of minutes. The Jacquard Shadow Fleet never even saw it coming. The cloaking fields, designed to bend light and absorb radar, offered absolutely zero physical resistance. In a perfectly synchronized display of overwhelming mathematical precision, all 50 Jacquard stealth cruisers were cored simultaneously. The hypervelocity human slugs punched through the alien vessels like bullets through wet tissue paper, detonating their dark matter drives from the inside. Space lit up with 50 distinct, silent blue supernovas. "Confirmed hits, Admiral," the operator reported casually. "All 50 contacts neutralized. Sector is clear." "Good," Wright said, setting his coffee mug down. "Now it's our turn to go on the offensive. Signal General Hayes and the ODST detachments. Initiate operation. Checkmate." Humanity had no intention of engaging in a drawn-out, bloody, interstellar war of attrition. They knew the Galactic Council was watching. They needed to make a statement so terrifying, so absolute, that the thought of attacking Earth again would become a galactic taboo. Using the dark matter FTL drives reverse-engineered by the Skunkworks teams just hours prior, a strike force of 6 human destroyers initiated a translation warp. But they did not target the Jacquard homeworld for a bombardment. Humanity understood that indiscriminate slaughter would only galvanize the Council against them. Instead, they targeted the Prime Forge, the massive ring-shaped orbital shipyard located over the Jacquard secondary capital of Valor. It was the heavily guarded crown jewel of the Jacquard military-industrial complex. When the human ships dropped out of warp directly inside the shipyard's defensive perimeter, bypassing the outer energy shields entirely, the alien defenders were caught completely off guard. Before the Jacquard could even power their plasma batteries, the human destroyers unleashed a barrage of targeted EMP warheads and electronic warfare drones. The Jacquard communication grids crashed. Their automated turrets spun aimlessly. Then, the true horror began. Hundreds of heavily armored boarding pods launched from the human ships, slamming violently into the hull of the Prime Forge. The pods breached the station's outer armor, deploying thousands of United Nations orbital marines into the sterile, bioluminescent corridors of the alien facility. The Jacquard defenders, accustomed to clean, ranged energy combat, were entirely unprepared for the brutal, close-quarters efficiency of human infantry. Armed with magnetic accelerator assault rifles and heavy tungsten-laced combat armor, the Marines swept through the station with terrifying speed. They utilized flashbangs, breaching charges, and synchronized squad tactics perfected over decades of human urban warfare. In exactly 22 minutes, the primary command center of the Prime Forge was breached. General Robert Hayes, clad in heavy exo-armor, stepped over the stunned, disarmed bodies of the Jacquard command staff. He walked directly to the station's main broadcasting console, wiped a smear of alien blood off the lens, and established a direct, unencrypted link to the Galactic Council on Ethelgard. The massive screen in the Grand Citadel flickered, replacing the image of Earth with the imposing, armored visage of General Hayes, standing victorious inside the most secure Jacques Karn military installation in the galaxy. "High Arbiter Othrin," Hayes boomed, his voice distorted slightly by his helmet's internal microphone. 30 minutes ago, the Jacques Karn Emperor attempted a stealth biological strike against Earth. We destroyed his fleet. In retaliation, we have seized the Prime Forge. The council chamber erupted in panicked shrieks, but a single deafening gunshot from Hayes' sidearm into the ceiling of the station silenced them. "Listen to me very carefully," Hayes commanded. "We did not glass the planet below us. We did not execute these prisoners. We are not the monsters your quarantine assumed we were. But make no mistake, we are better at war than you could ever comprehend." Hayes leaned closer to the camera. "Earth is open for business. We will trade, we will negotiate, and we will participate in this galactic council. But if any empire, species, or fleet ever points a weapon at our solar system again, we won't just break your fleets. We will take your infrastructure, dismantle your empires, and we will do it before you even have time to sound the alarm." Hayes reached out and cut the feed, leaving the Grand Citadel in a stunned, absolute silence. High Arbiter Othrin slowly stood up. He looked around at the trembling delegates, realizing that the galaxy had fundamentally changed forever. They had tried to lock a beast in the dark, only to find out the beast had spent its time in the shadows building a kingdom. "Draft a formal invitation," Othrin whispered to his aides, his voice filled with a mixture of dread and awe. "Welcome humanity to the Galactic Council, and pray they accept our offer." The universe thought Earth was an easy target, a primitive rock ripe for the taking. Instead, they discovered a species that had spent 80 years turning their paranoia into the most devastating military-industrial complex the galaxy had ever seen. The quarantine is shattered, and humanity has claimed its rightful place among the stars, not as victims, but as apex predators. If you loved this HFY Sci-Fi journey, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more epic stories.